Joining me now is Miles Taylor, former national security official in the Trump administration. Thanks for being here. You're also, of course, the author of Blowback, a warning to save democracy from Trump's revenge. So Trump's former attorney turned key witness, Michael Cohen, said this weekend he is worried about possible security briefings if Trump does wind up behind bars. Take a listen to what he said.
So my concern is in a prison situation, he's willing to give away these secrets, as I always say, for a bag of tuna or a book of stamps. And he will do it because he doesn't care. If America turns against him, he'd rather see America burn to the ground.
Strong words there from Michael Cohen. First, your reaction to the verdict, and also, are there any concerns about what Donald Trump could say if he actually went to prison?
Well, Yamiche, it's an extraordinary verdict, an extraordinary moment. And regardless of what the legal analysis is of the case, the reality stands that there is a man who's been convicted by a jury of his peers, who's running as one of the two major party candidates for the presidency. That is of enormous consequence, and maybe even more shocking than that, Yamiche. I think a lot of us expect that it's not going to dent his support very much within his own party. Now, we've yet to see really comprehensive polls after the ruling, but that's the sense of a lot of folks who were looking at the crosstabs initially. And I think that's just remarkable and says something quite remarkable about our politics. Now, to Michael Cohen's comments, I've got to say, I don't really think that that's an overstatement. I think it really is quite extraordinary in its own right that someone who's a convicted criminal would be receiving the sort of standard intelligence briefings a major party candidate gets before the presidency. But this is a story, Yamiche, that, of course, goes back about a decade. I mean, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time in 2016, I remember how concerned officials in the intelligence community were. They even ran war games on how and what to share with the man because it was suspected that he might potentially be compromised by Russia. Then, of course, as president, we worried about sharing compartmented classified information with him because of his tendency, as Cohen noted, to trade information and to share things we had told him were secrets where people's lives depended on it. And then, of course, after the presidency, he stole classified documents. And we can't soon forget he was convicted on felony charges not related to those documents. But as he's getting these intelligence briefings, he is being charged with having stole secrets previously. So you've got to think that current intelligence officials are going to try to figure out how to appropriately provide those briefings, but sanitize them of information that could put lives in danger.
That's all such important context when we think about the sort of intelligence that he might have access to. Now, normally, Trump being convicted of a felony would make it very difficult to obtain a security clearance. But the Washington Post points out that that doesn't apply to the highest office of the land, of course, that being the presidency. Simply by winning office, presidents are given access to classified information and are considered the ultimate classification authority in the government. Is this something that worries you? And do you think this could ever change given the protocols here? Of course, Donald Trump is really maybe an anomaly here. Maybe it's a new phase in American democracy here. But he is, of course, the first former president to be convicted of a felony. But do you think that this could change things?
I do think it could. In fact, Yamiche, when I used to work with folks in the Justice Department who handled classified information cases, they were always worried about these edge cases, these extraordinary episodes where classification law could get tested. Why? Because that would set precedent in later years for other cases. And I say this because there is so much unusual and very unhelpful precedent being set with Donald Trump's mishandling of classified information that you do worry in the future when we charge individuals for spying on the United States and mishandling classified information that they might have precedent to point back to that gets them a more lenient sentence or it makes it difficult for them to be prosecuted at the end of the day. That is a concern for folks in the Justice Department and nonpartisan officials who deal with these cases. But then, as Cohen notes, there is this very bizarre circumstance in which it may be possible Donald Trump is imprisoned with other convicted felons. And yes, the man does trade information. We've seen him do it at the highest levels and the lowest levels, from world leaders who shouldn't know our classified secrets down to valets who absolutely shouldn't be handling that information. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to be concerned about how this man is going to handle secrets that he's already proven to be incapable of handling.
Yeah. And as we think about this, we have to underscore again that the verdict is not expected to change plans for Trump to receive security briefings once he's officially the GOP presidential nominee. This comes, of course, despite him facing charges, as you pointed out, to mishandling classified information. Now, the briefings, they're considered to be more low level. Do you think, though, that the intelligence agents, the rank and file people that are going to be giving these briefings to him, do you think they're going to be particularly careful when it comes to Donald Trump?
Yeah, Yamisha, I think they're going to be reconsidering that right now. Now, I don't think the Biden administration will decide to not give these briefings to Trump. But as I say, I think they will consider how to sanitize those briefings so that he can still be provided relevant information in case he becomes president of the United States again, the sort of national security information someone would need to know, maybe operations he should be prepared to overtake, but withhold enough of those details that should he go share them with folks, that they could protect those operations and those individuals involved. But just the mere fact that intelligence officials, again, nonpartisan intelligence officials, would have to do that speaks to the extraordinary nature of this moment. And again, let's not forget, he is currently being charged with having unlawfully removed such information in the past. So they have to be really delicate about what they share with Donald Trump. But I don't think Biden wants to be seen withholding those briefings, because that will turn into yet another political issue. So they're in a difficult position, but they'll be in no more difficult position than if he becomes president of the United States again, because Trump has signaled he'll go after the crown jewels. He wants to declassify information, and that could pose much bigger risks to the intelligence community.
Yeah, well, important context and important information, Miles Taylor, as we are, as you said, an extraordinary, historic, unprecedented, and all sorts of words we could use for the times we're living through. Thank you so much, Miles.
Thanks, Yamiche.